to Carter G. Woodson for having the initiative and the foresight to start and found Black History Month in February 1926. Let's give the ancestral spirit our praise, because some people have laid the foundation for us where we are today. We cannot forget the contribution of our ancestors. And I say that very seriously. Sometimes we just, take a lot of stuff for granted. But I am motivated to do and to be part of this Black History Month series because I know what the ancestors have sacrificed for us to be here. And what I tell my students in my classes, and by the way, in sociology, I am teaching African diaspora studies and sociology of race, but my only regret is that I am the only person in the department who teaches those topics. And if for some reason I'm not here, those topics will not be taught. So we're looking at secession. Well, I am anyway, because I see it as an important part of our curriculum, Black Studies and African New World Studies and African Studies. I'm passionate about it. I was taught, I was exposed to that after spending 20 years in the US at both Temple University and also at Florida International University. So for me, it's second nature to be engaged in Black studies and African New World studies. And actually, when I came here, and my colleagues know that, in 2006, so I've been here 20 years now, the time has really run off the clock. To my surprise, there was no sociology of race in my department. There was no Black studies being taught at that time. So I said, listen, I'm going to have to create these topics to be taught because I can't come from the US and come to Jamaica, which is hailed as being one of the most revolutionary and Black conscious islands in the Caribbean, and there isn't a Black studies program in the department. There is no mention of Marcus Garvey in my department, So I'm just saying all that to give you a context that some people take it for granted that we have strong Black studies and African diaspora studies programs in Jamaica. Well, I don't think so, personally. And I think there's a lot to be done on the ground in that regard. I don't know what UTech has. Is there anyone here from the University of Technology? Do they have a Black Studies program, an African Diaspora Studies program? I know MICO does now, thanks to Professor Clinton Hutton being at MICO University, But let's look around our institutions and ask ourselves how many of them teach actively the sociology of race, African studies, Black studies. Yes, most of the population here is Black. And that's why we should have a program like that, those kind of programs. All right? I'm not going to say too much on that right now because I could give you a whole lecture on that. But I want to also just say, appreciate those of you who've taken the time to come out, because I know in this digital world, it's much easier just to catch a program online. And everyone's been asking me, are you going to have it virtually and so forth and so forth. And to be honest with you, I'm a face-to-face person, and I realize that. I'm a dinosaur. And yes, you could have it all virtual and stuff, and people can sit in the comfort of their sitting rooms, their living rooms, and take in the program. But for me, face-to-face interaction is more valuable than over the computer screen. That's me. I'm a dinosaur, and I own that. Since COVID, everyone's got into this. Everything is online. Everything is digital. Well, if you're abroad, yes. But if you're in the city, if you're in Kingston, why not take the time out and travel to the venue and take in the lecture? I don't know what my colleagues feel, but that's my thing. People now don't even want to leave the house. You got to do everything on the computer at home, And my students complain that we're having face-to-face classes. They all want to say, why don't we have it online? I can wrap up under my duvet and take in the class. In which case I reply, well, not in my classes, because I don't believe in the virtual classes. Only if there's an emergency and I can't come in to teach, but otherwise it's face-to-face. I don't want to look at a computer screen with blank squares, and I'm talking to a computer screen with blank squares. And most people when they're on Zoom, they don't interact anyway. They're making tea or they're, doing something else. I mean, let's be honest. So, let's think about the direction we're going in. As a sociologist, I'm about social interaction. What is the quality of our social interactions when we just do everything online? I think there's a depreciation in that interactive space when you're just talking digitally across the digital screen. But that's me. Anyway, so setting the context for Black History Month, setting the context. And very quickly, before I introduce our first speaker, and everyone has a program, so everyone knows who our first speaker is, a very distinguished professor and a historian. But just before I introduce her, I want to just share just a couple of my literature pieces. So, this is, everyone should have this on their bookshelf. Robin Walker, When We Ruled, right? Context of that is that, and we will discuss this later on, that African people, black people, once ruled the planet. In fact, go as far to say that the first civilization on this planet was created by black people, African people, okay? When we look at ancient Egypt or Kemet, I'm talking about ancient Egypt, I'm putting it out there that the first Egyptians were black in the fullest sense. So those pyramids that we see, many of us see, are actually built by African people, black people, right? Now that has been challenged today. Of course it would be, because everybody recognizes the magnificence and the sheer architectural genius it would take to build those pyramids. Now, if you actually bestow that to black people, African people, then you're really saying, this is a great race. This is a mighty, talented, and brilliant race. And because none of us really look at our history in depth, we don't know the greatness that we achieved from those years. So now we have become sidelined, boxed in as great athletes, sprinters, great. But nobody knows about the brilliant minds, the many brilliant minds that we've had for centuries. I mean, even if we go fast forward into the 1400s, thereabout, Timbuktu University, which is in Mali, West Africa, that university was founded before the universities in Europe, before Cambridge University, which is England's oldest university, before any of the Ivy League schools in the US. There was a Timbuktu University in Africa, in black sub-Saharan Africa, right? You also have Lalibela, if you go to Ethiopia, anyone who's been. The churches in Lalibela are carved out of solid rock. Carved out of solid rock. Architectural genius again. The Great Wall of Zimbabwe, right? Which is still there in Zimbabwe if anyone chooses to go. We have all of these records of architectural brilliance. So when we see these old Tarzan movies and so forth, with black people running around in loincloths and a bone through the nose and all of this kind of, this depiction, this very offensive prediction. I don't know if any of you watch these black and white Tarzan movies. I watched them, and even if I was a youngster back then, 6 or 7, I said, something's wrong here about this depiction. And then you have the great white hero, Tarzan, who comes to save them. All right, so we're tired of these narratives. We've got to change the narrative. And that is why it is important to have a strong sense of black history, to know your past, because you can't direct yourself, navigate yourself if you have no sense of the past, right? So history is underappreciated. Why is it underappreciated? Well, that's a question maybe our distinguished professor can answer. But I know the value of history. Born and bred on it is a very important part of my sociology. So without that historical bedrock, I can't teach anyone any sociology. So I have to read some of the history to be knowledgeable about what happened in the past to inform the present. Now, I'm glad to say that we are finally, in our sociology program, I'll wrap up on this, we have finally introduced W.B. Du Bois into the curriculum. And I've gone further. I myself made sure we introduced Marcus Garvey into the program as a social theorist. I did get some resistance initially in my department about Garvey being, because he didn't have a sociology degree. But my argument was, even though he didn't have a sociology degree, he showed himself to be a social theorist. He analyzed what was going on in the world, in the globe. And he came to the conclusion that black people all over the world were denigrated and oppressed, and in a very, very poor condition. That's why he promised, and he convicted himself, committed himself to the upliftment of black people all over the world. Is when he traveled and saw the condition that black people were living in all over the world, he said, my gosh, I got to do something about this. So he was motivated because he saw for himself the worldwide condition of African people, or black people. And he did something about it. And we know he did something about it. And in my mind, that's why he died at an early age. He was only 52 when he died. Now, a lot of us in here have reached, I'm glad I've reached beyond 52. But he died because of hard work, struggle, and the barriers he faced. I think he died, stress. I mean, he ended up having a stroke and a whole heap of things. Prof. Lewis can better speak to that because he is one of our notable Garvey historians. And it's great to have you here, Prof. Lewis. But we have to realize that the pressure that Marcus Garvey was under, and from many members of his own race. Yes, when he was in the USJ, Edgar Hoover wanted to get rid of him. And that's understandable, because he said we must beware of a black messiah. And he saw Marcus Garvey as that, as a potential black messiah. So it was on the cards that they were going to try and get rid of him. What? You're trying to unite black people, African people? You're trying to empower them? We can't have that. You've got to go. I mean, it's like inevitable. But he struggled, and he had the bravery to continue, because the easiest thing is to say, you know what, let me just hang up my hat and live a peaceful life, live a long life. Why endeavor in these kind of struggles and ultimately face an early death? I mean, why bother? Just live a peaceful life and keep yourself to yourself. That's the easiest way. But he had the courage to stand up and to struggle. Okay, so without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker. And I'm very proud to introduce her because, as I said to Prof, I'm talking about Professor Verene Shepherd. I said, for me, she is the symbol and most definitely an exemplary example of a public intellectual, right? And by that I mean that Prof. Shepherd is not shy about speaking outside of the classroom. Yeah, she's not bashful. She spreads the knowledge wide and far, not just on the radio as well. She had her own program, Talking History, but at many other forums. And I respect that, because the easiest thing, let me tell you, as somebody who is a lecturer myself, the easiest thing is, as soon as you've done your classes, you just go home and do your stuff. I mean, why bother go out on these public lectures and you're not getting paid for it, right? If we were only motivated by the almighty dollar, then we wouldn't even be doing stuff like this. So people got to realize that it's not just a one, two, three, that this kind of outreach takes motivation. And the motivation ain't about the money. I didn't coordinate this for any money. I'm not getting a paycheck. In fact, to be honest with you, I'm paying money for this to happen. So let's put it into context. But anyway, let me introduce Prof. Shepard. She is Professor Emerita of Social History at the University of the West Indies. She is also a Vice Chair and immediate past Chair of the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, the oldest treaty body in the UN system. Can you imagine? So this Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination actually implements the International Convention on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. Prof. Shepard is a consultant historian to the Center for Reparation Research at the University of the West Indies. She's a vice chair of the CARICOM Reparation Commission, and she is a member of the Jamaican National Council in Reparations, of which I'm also a member. And so is Prof. Lewis here, and so is Prof. Clinton Hutton. She is a published author, co-author, editor, co-editor of several books and referee journal articles. Among the books are edited with Dahlia Bean, Gender-Based Violence in the Caribbean, Historical Roots, Contemporary Continuities, 2025. Then she also did the biography of Lucille Maffern-Mayer. She also did Livestock, Sugar and Slavery, Contested Terrain in Colonial Jamaica, I Want to Disturb My Neighbor, Lectures on Slavery, Emancipation and Post-Colonial Jamaica, and Maharani's Misery, Narratives of a Passage from India to the Caribbean. So she's written voluminously. Too many articles to mention right now. Also, I should just say she's received several awards, including the UE Vice Chancellor's Award for Excellence of Public Service, the Order of Distinction, Commander of Class from the Government of Jamaica for work in history and gender studies and of public service. She's also received the African Studies Distinguished Award from FIU. Whoa, look at that. I didn't know that, Prof, that you got that award from my school. That's where I got my PhD, actually, FIU. And she also received the 2020 President's Book Fair Award in St. Martin. So, Prof. Shepard, the floor is yours. Give thanks.
Thank you very much. Sure. Okay. Thank you very much, Michael, for your kind invitation, first of all, and for your introduction. And thank you, audience, for your warm welcome. It's good to be back here at the University of the West Indies, from which I fled some years ago, aka retirement. So this evening, I'm focusing on the anti-colonial women, mainly through their anti-slavery actions, not because I do not give a lot of credit to the anti-colonial men. So men, calmate. But because women need to be given more credit as anti-colonial warriors, and I choose to revisit and emphasize their role tonight. In fact, formerly enslaved man Frederick Douglass was quite clear about the importance of anti-slavery women when he said, and I quote, "When the true history of the anti-slavery cause shall be written, women will occupy a large space in its pages, for the cause of the slave has been peculiarly women's cause." So Frederick Douglass, 1845. And maybe he said that because of the multiple strategies that women employed to contest chattel enslavement. But before going any further, let me give thanks for the sacrifice of the enslaved women who walked the district of Hopewell St. Mary, alias Africa, in which I grew up. Long before me, they were there, among them Kuba, Mimba, Sue, Delia, Wanika. For the rest of the time allowed me, I want to focus broadly on women who oppose the obscenity of chattel enslavement and the inequities of the so-called free order. Let me hasten to say that I'm not the pioneer of this field. Scholars like Lucille Matherin Mayer, Lynette Vastle, and Rhoda Reddock, and later Hilary Beckles, Barbara Bush, Marietta Morrissey, and many others started long ago to question the existing modernist notions of society, according to which history was regarded as universal with no gender differentiation. They oppose the so called universal truths and scrutinize the meaning of history as it had come to be known. They also criticize the dichotomous thinking of those who would exclude women from the historical accounts, seeing the sex versus gender, work versus family, public versus private, nature versus culture, political versus personal, as only serving to justify the exclusion of women from academic discourses. These historians have allowed us access to the evidence of revolutionary struggle by our ancestors that have provided the reasons we need to be in the struggle. In fact, some of us have become revolutionary academics and inserted ourselves in another type of revolutionary act because Walter Rodney, who described himself as a revolutionary intellectual, has told us that to be a revolutionary intellectual means nothing if there is no point of reference to the struggle. So, why struggle? While the historiography is replete with the plantation and domestic lives of women, it is equally full of evidence of their revolutionary acts, because every form of control generates an opposing struggle for liberation. As Harriet Jacobs said, my master had power and law on his side. I had a determined will. There is might in each. Women may not have always been in the vanguard of armed wars, but their day to day strategies clearly bothered enslavers and their supporters, and ultimately so undermined the efficiency of the plantations that they played a key role in the abolition of chattel enslavement, giving light to the view of harmless petticoat rebels. Women use a combination of day to day economic and psychological strategies as well as armed struggle to undermine the raison d'etre of chattel enslavement, and they undermined it from the moment of capture. Women, who formed about 38% of each shipment on the slavers, participated in anti slavery actions and shipboard protests. Historians have also noted that an insurrection occurred every 8 to 10 journeys, which were usually harshly suppressed. Enslaved Africans continued the struggle in the Caribbean, engaging in one protracted war after another to end chattel enslavement. Modern scholarship affirms that Black women were a fundamental part of the campaign for freedom and rights in the colonial Caribbean. So it is for these freedom loving women who fought against conquest, colonization, enslavement, and imperialism that many of us engage in the politics of memory, advocating for reparations and reparatory justice. In the chattel enslavement era, many women tried to reclaim their humanity by being agents of liberation. And I'm not trying to be chronological, but I must begin with examples from Haiti, starting with Cecile Fatiman, 1791 to 1845, a Haitian voodoo priestess and revolutionary. She lived her early life in slavery before being drawn to Enlightenment ideals of liberté, égalité, fraternité, and Haitian voodoo, which shaped her desire to end the institution of slavery in Haiti. Together with Dottie Bookman, she led a voodoo ceremony at Boy Cayman and incited enslaved people to rise up against slavery in an event that marked the beginning of the Haitian Revolution. Marie Saint Dede Basile was also absolutely key in the revolution. Often callously considered to be a mad woman, Marie Saint Dede Basile's story is saturated with traumatic incidents. Being a survivor of rape by her enslaver, as well as witnessing the death of her family, this Haitian revolutionary woman carried a lot with her into the war. She escaped her enslaver to join the fight for Haiti's revolution. We must sing praise songs to rebel maroon women, Queen Nanny or Nana in Jamaica, Charlotte and Angelique of Dominica, who so ably destabilized British colonialism. Solitude of Guadeloupe, who after the Haitian Revolution and the extension of freedom to Guadeloupe and Martinique, joined in the struggle for lasting freedom in 1802, gaining for herself the designation of heroine of Guadeloupe. Solitude had joined the Maroon settlement of La Goyave in the mid 1790s And during an attack by the French, she became the leader of a small group that escaped to the hills of Guadeloupe, eluding capture. When French forces landed in Guadeloupe on May 5, 1802, to carry out the order to reinforce slavery, Solitude, now pregnant, mobilized her followers to join the forces of Louis Delgray against the French military. Though most of the Maroons died in the effort, Solitude survived and was captured and detained in Bastille prison. They waited until she gave birth to execute her on November 28, 1802. We honor Nanny Gregg of Barbados, who, along with Bussa, struggled to end one of the greatest crimes against humanity in Barbados in 1816. Betta Douglas of St. Kitts Nevis, who in 1825 demonstrated the power of hunger strike while in the stocks. Filda, Queen and Abba of Antigua, and Tranquille and Calypso of Dominica, all recognized as quintessential rebel women who embodied the spirit of Black women's resistance to systems of domination. Let us sing praise songs to the women like Wanika, who were referred to by 18th and 19th century writers on Jamaica as female demons who thwarted the overseers in the field and fomented what they called petticoat rebellion, and Susanna of the 1823 Demerara War. Let us recognize women who use body language and dress or undress to register their discontent with discriminatory systems and policies. Domestic women who found various ways to harass, frustrate, and even poison their enslavers, like Sally Bassett of Bermuda, burned at the stake in 1730 because she refused to collaborate with the system of slavery, but whose statue now, however controversially, stands tall on the front lawns of the Parliament building in Bermuda. Let us sing praise songs to women who joined strikes to negotiate for rights and use economic resistance to carve out an autonomous niche for themselves within the confines of slavery. Women like the emancipationist Mary Prince, for whom a plaque was erected in 2007 near the present location of the University College London in the UK, who opposed the gradualism of British abolitionist William Wilberforce and his parliamentary colleagues, and from the US slave South to Brazil took the fight to the enslavers through participating in armed revolts. The 1692 Afro-Barbadian revolt, in which 51 were executed, 4 of them women. The 1736 revolt in Antigua, led by now national hero King Court alias Tacky and his Creole conspirator Tomboy, in which his sister Filda and other enslaved women attended the plotting meetings, and Queen and Abba played a central role in the ceremonial preparations. Let us think about the 1824 War in Demerara, the 1824 Argyle War in Hanover, Jamaica, which featured Mary Ann Reid, and the 1831 anti-slavery war in Jamaica that has been credited with forcing Britain to end slavery. Now, I had asked Michael to put up the list of women from Jamaica who were, some of them hanged, imprisoned, deported. But I don't know if you have that list to put up. Oh, yeah, okay. Well, while you do that, I'll still read their names. Those who suffered under the leadership of Sam Sharp in that war were Jenny from Kirkpatrick Hall in St. James, who was put to death; Kitty Scarlett from Cambridge St. James, death, commuted to transportation; Eliza Whittingham from Kew Park, Westmoreland, death; Jane Whittingham, same Kew Park, Westmoreland, she was hanged. Charlotte Reed from Lambs River, Westmoreland, she got 6 months imprisonment. And the list goes on. And when you see the list up, you will see that women, anti-slavery women in Jamaica, suffered for their anti-slavery actions in this war.
The list is up now, Prof.
Great. So you can see that list and absorb the information that's there. Use it in your schools, in your lectures, because there are those who think that the war itself was a male-only war, but there were quite a few women. You can see the list on the screen. I go now to the Danish Caribbean. We sing praise songs to Queen Mary, Queen Agnes, and Queen Matilda, along with a whole host of other enslaved Africans who traveled around to 50 plantations and burnt down houses, sugar mills, fields, and stores. It is said that over half the city of Frederiksted was burned down. To this day, Queen Mary, Queen Agnes, and Queen Matilda are considered heroines. The local population erected statues of the three women, and one of the main roads in St. Croix is named Queen Mary Highway. In St. Lucia, we must think of Flore Boy Gaillard, tired of the harshness of both the French and immediately after the English who occupied the land, who escaped the plantation in 1793. After running away and taking refuge in the woods, she came across other escaped Africans who had formed an army. The army planned a war to rid the country of the British for good and declare St. Lucia a free country. So Flore Boy Gaillard remains as a significant national treasure in St. Lucian history. There is also a monument to honor her called Piton Flore. We go now to Cuba. Carlota Lucumi, La Negra Carlota, was brought to Cuba as an African woman of Yoruba origin. Today, Carlota is known for the anti-slavery acts in the Triunvirato plantation in Matanzas, Cuba, during the period 1843 to 1844. And as conditions intensified on the plantations in Cuba, many acts of resistance occurred between 1830 to the late 1840s. In 1843, Lukumi and another enslaved woman, Firmina, began to plot, a plot that was uncovered by the enslavers, and Firmina was beaten and imprisoned. Carlota Lukumi continued with this war, coordinating with her talking drum to lead a raid on November 3, 1843, to free Firmina and the other enslaved people. Under Carlotta's genius and bravery, they burned down the torture house, killed the overseer's daughter, Maria de Regla, and then forced Julian Luis Alfonso, the owner of the Triunvirato plantation, to flee for good. In the ongoing two-day struggle, Carlotta and her army destroyed 5 sugar plantations. They fought until the very end, and on the last day that the last plantation was destroyed, Lukumi and Firmina were both captured and executed. Carlotta's body was tied to a horse and dragged until she died. Let us sing praise songs to those who oppose the apprenticeship system designed to extract compensation in free labor to the British enslavers. Let us sing praise songs for Black working class women who, in the post slavery century of racial apartheid and sexism, made it clear that they had no intention of conforming to the Victorian gender order and the gender systems of the new era that sought to confine women to the private sphere of uncompensated labor in the home and promote the male as breadwinner ideology. Let us sing praise songs to women who took part in the fight for justice in Morant Bay in 1865, among them Mary Ward, Letitia Gohagan, Mary Ann Francis, and Judy Edwards, who were hanged, and Rosa McBean and Amelia Stewart, who were shot by the British suppressionist forces. Women were also among those who received long prison terms and who languished in jail long after 1865. In the correspondence of Sir Anthony Musgrave, Governor of Jamaica, 1877 to 1883, is a request to the Colonial Office, upon the recommendation of puny Judge Justice Alan Carr, for the reduction or reversal of the sentences of 11 persons still serving time in 1880 for their part in the Morant Bay War. In his November 16, 1880 letter to Musgrave, through the Colonial Secretary, Mr. Justice Carr stated, and I quote, "I have for some time past been of the opinion that the interests of administration of justice do not require their further detention, and that the prerogative of mercy might, even with beneficial effect, be exercised towards them. I believe their prison conduct has been good." End of quote. The women in jail were Carlin Grant, 39 years old, Sarah Johnson, 44, Rosanna Finlayson, 39, and Amelia Murray, 26, who were sentenced to 20 years in prison. On December 6, 1880, Governor Musgrave duly wrote to the Secretary of State supporting Carr's plea and specifying the details of the request. Those who were sentenced to life, this is what he said, those who were sentenced to life should have their sentences reduced to 20 years, and those who received that 20-year sentence should be freed. This act of clemency he proposed to take place on the next Queen's birthday, but the request was denied by the Colonial Office, and the decision was conveyed to Governor Musgrave in January 1881. Anti-colonial struggle continued way after Morant Bay, of course, notably in the workers' labor protests of the 1930s in Jamaica and in the shaping of an independent society. But that post-1930s and 1960s anti-colonial struggle is for another time. So I conclude. All I will say in conclusion is that modern-day women's movements and feminism cannot be understood without excavating and locating these prior waves of activism and theorizing on women's conditions dating back centuries. Remembrance gives strength and assists in recuperating the past for the benefit of the present. We must sing praise songs for women whose revolutionary ideology and program were clearly anchored in their experiences and in their sense of what had become, as Rex Nettleford often terms it, a derided and emasculated ancestral culture, or late Professor Rex. The political action of these women should inspire us, their descendants. And yes, their actions were political because it is now accepted that politics is broader than but inclusive of representational politics and state actions. It allows for the inclusion of the protest actions by those who are not, never have been, or never will be elected officials. Those marginalized groups who must use other means of seeking change. Not only did her feet run unwilling errands, and her fingers do the work which in large degree supplied the sinews of war, but her deep moral convictions found convincing and persuasive expression by her pen and her voice. And as the late US historian Randall Robinson reminds us, memory is the active agent of collective social progress, and we see that playing out now in the reparations movement. Thank you very much for listening.
All right. Thank you, Prof. Shepherd. So we're going to move into our next speaker now, but I just want to let you know that we're now running up against the clock. So we have a very full panel. What it means is that each speaker is going to really only have 20 minutes max. So just time yourself. It's not ideal, but let's get as much as we can in what time we have so that we have some time for question and answer. So our next speaker is Mr. Stephen Golden, and he is the president of the Universal Improvement Association and African Communities League. That's the UNIA-ACL, which was originally founded by Garvey, our first national hero, in 1914, of course. So Stephen Golden has here that he's a professor of Garveyism. Stephen chaired the Garvey Studies Department at the Heidel University in St. Catherine, Jamaica, and he lectures on the philosophy of Marcus Garvey at the primary, secondary, and tertiary level, having also taught Garveyism as a rehabilitative program in Jamaica's general penitentiary system and other correctional facilities. He is the founding director of Jamaica's only authentic African cuisine restaurant, known as Cafe Africa, and he's served as chairman of the African Caribbean Institute of Jamaica, that's the ACIJ, and the Jamaica Memory Bank. He currently serves as a member of the Jamaica National Council on Reparations, and he is a director of the board for the Institute of Jamaica. Stephen has hosted and executively produced media content on both radio and television since the early 2000s. He is the president of the UNIA and African Communities League here in Jamaica. He founded the Global Garvey Symposium series that has launched in several US cities, including Atlanta, Baltimore, Brooklyn, Philadelphia, and New York. as well as in several countries, including Jamaica, Barbados, Costa Rica, St. Lucia, St. Vincent, and Trinidad and Tobago. Stephen Golding is the author of the Daddy Marcus Nursery Rhyme Book, which was developed as a teaching tool dedicated to the decolonizing of the early childhood educational curriculum in the English-speaking Caribbean. Stephen Golding is the son of Jamaica's 8th Prime Minister, Bruce Golding, just in case you're wondering, and he's a graduate of the Johns Hopkins University. He is married to Jamaican media personality Empress, and together they have a son, Kush, and a daughter, Zipporah. So, there you go, a very comprehensive bio. So let's give it up now for Stephen Golding.
Thanks, Dr. Barnett. Good evening, everyone. Happy Black History Month. It's still Black History Month in Jamaica, right?
I think so.
Black History Month is about 75 years older than Reggae Month, you know. I think Reggae Month was it 2000, 2008? Yeah. But the truth is you cannot separate reggae from Black history either. Not if we're talking about real reggae. I want to thank Dr. Barnett for the invitation and the opportunity to participate. This is a special year, as he mentioned earlier. It's a centennial year since the establishment of Negro History Week in February of 1926, which became Black History Month in 1970 at Kent University, and then was later endorsed by the President of the United States office in 1976. So we're looking at a centennial. We're also looking at a golden jubilee. And what an important time to recognize this, particularly given who is currently occupying the office of the President of the United States of America, and his reluctance or his willingness to tear down some of these cultural recognitions. But this is also a significant year if we truly know our Black history or know our history as Africans in the diaspora. You know, Dr. Carter G. Woodson, who Dr. Barnett referenced earlier, and this is a good place to state that, you know, did you say this, Mike? He was a second PhD in history from Harvard, second Black PhD in history following William W.E.B. Du Bois. But he is the only child of enslaved Africans. His parents were enslaved to receive a PhD. But he did not create Black History Month or Negro History Week in a vacuum. In fact, he was heavily influenced by his peers at the time, which included two particular Jamaicans, Marcus Garvey, of course, and another of our unsung heroes who hails from the parish of Westmoreland by the name of Joel Augustus Rogers. And far too many Jamaicans are ignorant of that name. In fact, while they refer to Carter G. Woodson as the father of Black history, it is J.A. Rogers who was referred to as the father of Negro history. In fact, his association with other Garveyites like John Edward Bruce, other African historians like Arturo Schomburg, created the environment into which Dr. Carter G. Woodson stepped into in creating his association for the study of Negro life or African American history. So we cannot say that Black History Month is an American thing. In fact, the reason it was created and endorsed by people like Garvey, it comes out of the same tradition which is known as Ethiopianism. That might be a word many of you are not familiar with, but you should be. You can Google it. I think it's in Wikipedia. Ethiopianism predated Negro History Week. It was focused on questioning the history of Black people in the Bible, or how Africans were portrayed in the Bible. And it came about because Black clergy were challenging the existing religious structure that would not ordain Black people as bishops. And so they scoured the Bible to prove to the racist policymakers in the church that the Bible does not justify slavery or discrimination against Black people. Instead, it elevates Black people in their historical origins. And this is how passages like Psalm 68:31, which says, "Princes shall come out of Egypt, and Ethiopia shall stretch forth her hands unto God." Passages like, Solomon, he was Black and he was comely. These priests, Walton Peter, were trying to prove or to change or to combat the racist attitude and policies of the church leaders at the time, using their own documents, using their own biblical lore and biblical history to say this is the real history of Black people. So let's come back now to 1926 Negro History Week. This is the same light in which Carter G. Woodson was approaching the educational system at the time, and how Black people were taught about themselves and taught their own history. In fact, 6 years before Negro History Week, when Marcus Garvey made the Declaration of Rights of the Negro Peoples of the World in 1920, 54 declarations coming from a conference or convention of Black people representing both continental Africans and Africans in the diaspora. And they created this document which Garvey refers to as the Magna Carta of the race, which speaks to the world in terms of the issues Black people and the struggles and the discrimination they were facing at the time, but also had 54 demands that they were prepared to put to the world in terms of what needed to be done in a very reparative sense. What needed to be done to repair the situation that Black people were facing. And in that declaration, number 31 and 39 speak to the fact that even Garvey himself, as chair of that conference, as a thinker himself and as a proponent for Negro history, was concerned, one, with Declaration 31 speaks to the fact that the teaching of white supremacy in the schools was an issue. So he declares that must stop immediately. The teaching by alien races that they are superior to Negro children. Something is conking out my phone, or I would read it word for you. But this is the sense of 31. And then there's Declaration 39 that demands that Black students are given proper instructions in Negro history, which this predates you, Prof, because you are someone who's been calling for the need for history to be mandatory. Garvey was demanding the same thing in 1920, particularly in how Black history was taught to Black students. So what Carter G. Woodson and his colleagues at the time were trying to do was very much redeem the narrative that was being taught to Black children at the time. Garvey pointed out that what was being taught had elements of white supremacy, that children were coming out of school with this inferior complex, and they were not being given proper instruction about the true history of Africans, all of which was true in the 1920s. We're now in the 2020s. Is it still true today? Do we still have the remnants of white supremacy lingering in our educational curriculum? Are there still African names that when we call them, black children are confused, they never heard about? Prof just sat there and read the names of those women. And I know she's been a staunch advocate. She does it all the time. She wants it in the book. She wants it in the classroom. She wants children coming out of school knowing these names just as well as they know names like William Wilberforce and Granville Sharp. Joel Augustus Rogers. How many students leave school knowing that name? His books were put on the mandatory reading list for the UNIA juvenile divisions as early as the 1920s. Garvey was insisted, these are the books you need to read. This is the history you need to know. You know what is a glaring example of the fact that we need a Black History Month? Because over the years, I've heard a lot of talk. People talk about, oh, you can't put Black History Month you can't put Black History into 1 month. Another one is, oh, February is the shortest month of the year. That's the month that they give us. All kind of arguments. Remember in Garvey's own autobiography, he wrote, having had the wrong racial and cultural education at the start of his life, the Negro has become his own worst enemy. I'm not going word for word, but this is the essence of what the man said. And that we've become like crabs in a barrel. Yeah, that crab in a barrel quote comes from Marcus Garvey. That as soon as one climbs and is making it to a certain level, the rest of us, rather than pushing him up, we're pulling him down. And it has to do with the miseducation of the Negro, how we perceive ourselves. I was speaking at a high school on Friday, Bob's birthday. Which is funny because I started the speech by quoting lines from Bob's song, like I started, Until the Philosophy. And then I'd say, who wrote that? And they're like, Bob. I'm like, no, Haile Selassie wrote that. And I said, man to man is so unjust. Who wrote that? Bob. I said, no, Marcus Garvey. The sun shall not smite I by day, nor the moon by night. Big Bob tune, if you know Bob. Who wrote that? Bob. No, Solomon. That's in Proverbs. It's in the Bible. I was making the point of showing them how well read Bob Marley was and how he infused the history and the lessons of others in his own music and created a medium to pass it forward multiple generations to the point now where we think is Bob said these things and Bob wrote these things. No. I was saying to the students, though, that every November, we see our politicians and we see it in the schools and the student leaders in the schools. And, I'm not a young man anymore, but I remember what school was like in Jamaica. But we buy poppies. You remember this in school? Around about November, we buy the poppy and we wear it. You see our ministers and members of parliaments have it on at a certain time of year when they're deliberating in the parliament. And I was making the point to these students that, that poppy signifies a historical remembrance. It's for the world wars. The red is the blood from the field of Flanders, where the poppies grew, right, Prof? And every year, our leaders wear that. The students wear it, the schools get it. Maybe they don't even know what the history is, but it has become a tradition. It has become a part of the culture. And I stopped to ask these students, I said, have you ever heard of the Maafa? Let me ask you all. Have you all ever heard of the Maafa? This is a Swahili word. It means great disaster. And it's been popularized amongst Pan-Africanists since maybe the early 1990s, late 80s, as a description for our Holocaust. You know this word Holocaust, don't you? And what does it conjure in your mind when you hear it? Holocaust. It's a particular people, right? It's a particular experience, right? That experience lasted almost a decade. Horrible. Horrible. Terrible. And so every year there is a ritual that says, we must never forget this happened. The world must constantly remember this is how bad it could get. Never let it happen again. And I don't want to take away from, because that's brilliant. I mean, that's great for your society in a world that has committed those atrocities. But you know, I point out to people all the time that the Jewish Holocaust was a little under a decade. The African Holocaust went on for 3 centuries. 300 years weighs a lot more than 10 years or 9 years. And I asked these students, what day do you see our leaders? What day are we selling the black puppies in the school? What time of year do we recognize our own Holocaust, which was much more tragic, much more dreadful, and much more horrible than the Holocaust that we recognize every year? This is the reason why Carter G. Woodson them had to come up with a Black History Month. Because as Steve Biko says, I keep quoting it, the greatest weapon in the hands of the oppressor is the minds of the oppressed. And if they control the narrative of your own story, if they give you his story and not your story, that's where the problems begin. What number is that? Got 2 minutes left. Looked like he had said 3 and then he scratched out. And this year is 2026. You probably have not heard this before, but after you leave here, I want you to remind every black person you meet. This year marks exactly 500 years since the commercialization of chattel slavery and the first slave ship that trafficked, kidnapped Africans and took them directly from Africa to the Americas. It was a Portuguese ship. It left from the west coast of Africa around about the Kingdom of Congo, or what is today Angola, and it headed to Portugal. The first ship to do that. Now, don't get me wrong. Enslaved Africans had been brought to the Americas before this, even as early as 1507, to Christopher Columbus's nephew's own plantation, which sort of was a pilot project for the sugar plantations. His name was Don Diego Colon, Hispaniola. But those Africans that were brought came by ship from Europe. They had been taken from Africa to Europe and then brought to the Americas. There was a process that the Ma'afa went through where how it developed and how it came about. I got 1 minute left. Those Africans who were brought over to Christopher Columbus's nephew's plantation in 1507. You know what happened to them? Anybody? Nobody has heard this story before, right? If you look up the first quote-unquote slave revolt, African slave revolt, and I say quote-unquote because Prof will get vexed, don't call them slaves. But quote-unquote, it took place in 1522, on that very plantation, the pilot project for the commercialization of chattel slavery and the establishment of that on the sugar plantations. On the pilot project, the first set of Africans they took, it didn't take them, in 15 years they burned the plantation to the ground, headed to the hills. They became the first Maroons. I think it was 1521 actually. You know, in 2021, did anybody remember that? Did any one of these countries, even in Dom Rep, Hispaniola, did anybody stop and say 500 years ago was the start of our history? No. Because we get a white supremacy, whitewash curriculum that just broad brushes slavery. For hundreds of years, we've been calling our ancestors slaves without even making the distinction of saying they were enslaved, because of the education that we have gotten, because of the narrative that we were given by the very people who enslaved and colonized our ancestors. And so I got to end, even though I have a lot more things to say. Changing the narrative is important, right? If you get a chance, I wanted to share some of these nursery rhymes with you all, because I give this as an example. The most formative educational years in a child's life are between the ages of, say, 2 and 7, right? I know this because my grandmother, before she died, couldn't remember my name, but she could remember a memory verse she had said at church when she was 4 years old. She didn't know me when she was between 4 and 7, so I forgave her, right? But those things she had learned up to the grave. And so I wrote this book because I'm saying to black teachers, why is Jack and Jill still going up the hill? Why is Humpty Dumpty still sitting on the wall? Why is Baba black sheep who has the wool to give? Why is it the first one must go to the master, the second one must go to the dame, and then the last bag, the what left, it goes to the liquor boy who lived down the lane? Why the liquor boy don't live in the house with the master and the dame? You get what I'm going, you get where I'm going with this? But yet we're still teaching our children these things for nursery rhymes at that critical age of their life. And then we wonder where the white supremacy comes from. Give thanks.
All right, thank you, Stephen, enthralling presentation. And please remember, don't feel no way, Stephen, it's not the quantity, of information, it's the quality. And there was definitely some quality there. So, without further ado, because we have 3 more speakers, so the challenge is to squeeze them in before we run out of time. So, we are subjected to that limitation time. If anyone can turn back the clock here, well, give it a try. And let me just tell you, as someone who dabbles in physics, time is the 4th dimension. But we still haven't managed to find out how to reverse that. But there are people looking at the possibility of reversing time. But let me not get too far into the physics right now. But what I would say is that we need to appreciate science and technology, because right now, as a people generally on the planet, we are behind with science and technology. Where are our great engineers, our nuclear physicists, and so forth? Why aren't we building space shuttles to the moon or to Mars? Why are we limiting ourselves? Where is our nuclear power stations? The Chinese have that. The India has that. Pakistan has that. I don't know any African country that does. So that's another subject. But we are limiting ourselves far too much. What's the competitive spirit? Why aren't we trying to be number one on the planet? We were number one in the distant past, but we're definitely not number one right now. Anyway, so my next speaker is longtime friend, longtime colleague, and he used to be just next door to me over in the Department of Government when he was teaching at UWI. And now I guess it is a case that he's moved on, but he's still very active in publishing, prolific publisher, prolific writer, painter, philosopher. There's so many things I could say. But I'm speaking about Professor Clinton Hutton, who I should say, and I have no problem saying it publicly, have the greatest admiration for his work ethic, his passion, definitely a public intellectual, gives countless lectures all over Jamaica, if nothing else, and he has done it abroad, not for the money, not for the light, but the sheer passion for spreading knowledge, all right? And that mustn't be taken for granted. Some of us here don't do it for the money or for the light, but we do it because of the passion. So Prof. Clinton Hutton is now at Michael University College, I should say, doing great work there. So, it is what it is. So Prof. Hutton, I'm not going to give you, you were one of the only persons who didn't give me a bio, but maybe it was a good thing because yours would have been like 5-6 pages long and we'd have gone into your presentation time. So everything happens for a reason. But without further ado, Prof., the floor is yours. I'm afraid we're limited to 20 minutes. I hope you can say something in that time. Give thanks. 20 minutes, and it's going to run fast.
You just said 12.
No, I said 20. And if I did say 12, that was my mistake. But 20. Okay, good. Your time.
You can take off this. Take the computer. You want the computer? No, off, yes. I want to put the Brothers and sisters, greetings. I'm searching for my paper. I can't find it. My presentation, it's somewhere here. Anyway, I will go on without. Essentially, what I want to do is to talk about the type of education, the type of schooling, the type of philosophy that was constructed by the enslavers, by the colonialists, who call themselves masters. During the enslavement of Africans, and after slavery was abolished, they created a body of literature, a body of ideas, which justified, in the case of Jamaica, 329 years of enslavement. And that body of work continues. It became the basis of the education system after slavery was abolished. It remains today the core ideological system, the core philosophical system that explains the world. The core system that tells us how to think. There are different ways of thinking. There are different ways of knowing. And we can look at something and see what it is and say, what I am saying is not what it is. Because the eyes that we have been warped by the system, that cultural, intellectual, philosophical system to keep us on the straight and narrow. During slavery, we were taught, I just let me say we, because we have a philosophy that overrides the past tense. We actually tend to speak about our ancestors in the present tense. Right? We have an entire philosophy, entire way of seeing things. Quite often it is not in the formal school system. But guess what? Part of the struggle against slavery and post-slavery colonialism was to undermine that system of dominance. So, Paul Bogle's people in 1865, that's where the evidence is, but it's clear prior to 1865. And you can find it in Haiti as well, and across the Caribbean. There was a system in which, for example, which Garvey's philosophy is centered around. When people in St. Thomas in 1865 call out some of their own people of having black skin and white heart. 1865, recorded, but it existed prior to that. That's a challenge to the existing narrative about the relationship between Europeans and non-Europeans. There's a challenge to it. That the way in which Africans were socialized throughout the Western Hemisphere where they're enslaved, that as a result of that form of socialization, people develop an epistemological illness, which in Jamaica we call, when I was growing up as a boy, roast breadfruit. In 1865, Paul Bogle's people call it black skin, white heart. And one of our most foremost scholars in the Caribbean wrote about black skin, white mask. Frantz Fanon. So, narratives about our existence and the relationship between the abusers and the abused. Narratives were created to justify that abuse as normal, as normative. And so, one of the things that the enslavers did was to articulate the view that black people by themselves cannot free themselves. That we are unable to do struggles for freedom and identity and sovereignty Because whenever we try that, it is regarded as reverting to the state of barbarism and savagery. So in Europeans' crafting of freedom for black people and their anti-colonial, anti-slavery struggle, their crafting of it was that to raise your hands against, they call themselves the master, is to revert to barbarism and savagery. And this barbarism and savagery is called by one of Europe's most important philosophers during the time, George Hegel, as reverting to the state, to what he calls the zoological garden. Right? And we hear European scholars and politicians talking about that they live in the garden and that other people live in the jungle. We're talking about people who are good still to this day on the front line of European political establishment. Right? So freedom for black people was not freedom from their enslavement, but freedom from themselves. Not freedom from their enslavement, because if you fight for your freedom from enslavement, you're reverting to a zoological garden. And it cannot be allowed to happen. We cannot allow black people to go back to the state of nature. And so, black people, part of the resistance struggle is ideological, cultural, philosophical, intellectual. As we see Paul Bogle's people in St. Thomas talking about black skin, white heart. But there was somebody in St. Thomas at that time who was also arrested. John Willis Maynard, African American of Asian descent, who got married. He was 27, or 29, got married to a 19-year-old Jamaican young woman. When he was back on his way from Honduras, that's called British Honduras, because he was sent there by Abraham Lincoln to check out the scene, because the policy then during the Civil War was that when this thing is over, that blacks must be sent away from the United States so that white people have unity amongst themselves. That was the policy. And he was working at Capitol Hill at the time. And he was sent. And he was on his way back, he stopped in Jamaica, met this woman, then came back to Jamaica, married to this woman, and he was arrested during the Morant Bay Uprising. He was arrested during the Morant Bay Uprising. And the State Department actually interceded on his behalf. And the response from the colonial government in Jamaica, you don't know who this man is. He's planning with the people to cut white people's throat. But he was eventually freed and went back to the United States. And in 1867, he was elected in a by-election to the Congress of the United States. First black person to be elected. And the Congress passed a resolution so that they cannot allow this man to sit in Congress, and offered to pay part of his congressional fee, but he was not allowed to be seated in Congress, but was allowed to speak to the Congress in defense of himself. John Willis Maynard wrote a set of articles on public education in Jamaica in the 1860s, in 1865 to be precise. A number of articles, they are called public education. And his ideas about what education should mean in society is as relevant then as it is as relevant today. And so John Willis Maynard was one of the persons in these articles in the Sentinel was challenging the education status quo in Jamaica in the 1860s. Was challenging the assumptions of the role of black people vis-a-vis white people in society. Not only challenge, but explicitly use the development of societies and education in what he calls the tropical zone. That they were the founders of science, of philosophy, before there was any such thing in Europe. This is in 1865. He was advocating that education in our schools should include that. Then we have other persons, not just in Jamaica, but across the Caribbean. Vakti, a scholar of the Haitian Revolution who was an advisor to Henri Christophe, wrote a number of articles and a number of books. And it was straight Pan-Africanism. And he argued some of the same points by Maynard and about the role of Africa before slavery. The meaning of Africa to the world and its contribution to civilization before slavery, from antiquity, and place Africa's intellect as the leading force shaping humanity. This was never in our institutions. They fought for these things in our institution. Then we have Tilapia Shows, another person. And he spoke about these things as well, apart from critiquing the colonial empire of Britain. But Shows was also well respected in the United States amongst the black community. Right? Then we have, of course, you spoke about Rogers, an important figure. We don't have his book in our schools, but we have to resurrect those and put them in there, in the way Professor Lewis put Garveyism in the curriculum, because he was in a position to do it. Then you have Joel James, George James, the Guyanese, who wrote Stolen Legacy. That Greek philosophy is stolen African philosophy. And proven to be right. James died mysteriously in the 1950s after his book was published. He died mysteriously. As other persons in similar position died mysteriously. like David Walker in the early 1830s, having made a speech shortly thereafter, he died mysteriously. That appeal made by him. Right? So we have Harrison from the Virgin Islands, I think. Hubert Harrison. Highly respected. Highly, highly respected in the Gava movement, in the broad movement of African peoples. He even criticized the Michael in the 1920s and a similar institution in Trinidad in the 1920s and challenged the black community in the United States to ensure that black curriculum, decolonizing colonial episteme, and science, and mathematics, and philosophy. It is not that our people were silent. And that is the reason why history must be taught. And that is why history must inform philosophy and must inform sociology and must inform political ideas. And if there's anybody to emulate in relation to this vision, is Marcus Garvey, who was firmly for science and technology, but who stated that the first principle of philosophy and of education is self-discovery. Self-discovery. That if your education does not allow you to discover yourself, to know who you are, then that education is not good. In fact, he argued that people with their university education, including their PhD, if the education that they got does not teach them to serve themselves and their people, then he called them educated slaves. This is in the 20th century, in the early period of the 20th century. Right? So education should allow us to know ourselves, to shape it's a basis for sovereignty. If our education system does not allow us to know who we are, and hence, based on that, to shape how we behave, to shape our agental complex, how we act. The education does not do that, but allow us to act like some form of Europe in its conception of what black people ought to be. And so when you watch the news going on today, and you see some of the ideas taking shape, like in Gaza, when I hear they talk about Palestinian raping women, although there are no examples that they could have brought in to justify genocide. And then when I look and read the thing, in 1865, the reason why one white man says that we must take 1,000 black men's lives for one white man's heir. It's written, he said it. 1865. On the basis that black people were fighting not to free themselves, not to be sovereign, and as the slogan went, color for color, skin for skin, or liberty of person, liberty of land. That they were not fighting for that. What they were fighting for was to exterminate white men and take white women for themselves. That was what freedom in the newspapers, including the Gleaner, then. And one of the arguments was that the reason why we need to kill all of these people was because it was to save the dignity of white women. An entire narrative and books written. One Jamaica in 1866. A lecture which became a book written by a British Navy officer who was once stationed in Jamaica. All of the justifications that they use, that the purpose is to kill your babies, the purpose is to rape and sexually dominate white women. Those are the closest thing at the heart of European patriarchy, to rally all classes of Europeans to support the brutishness, as Marx called what happened in Morant Bay in 1865. So we have to struggle to have an education. And by the way, there are many things that have been published. There are many good teachers. I don't know what the percentage is. But we have to do better at teacher training. We have to do better at teacher training. We have to do, I think the more we know ourselves is the more we'll search. Is the more we will incite self-directed learning. The ability to teach ourselves to learn. The ability to develop the nerve and the culture for self-education. And one of the reasons for that is exactly what Garvey did. Prominent philosopher of the 20th century. Yet he was primarily a self-made man, intellectually and philosophically. Because he could not get that from the school system then. And that is the reason why we need to go on the path of self-directed learning and encourage it. So that what we get from the school, people can actually do things on their own at the same time. It is very important to do that. And it is very important, and I'm finishing now, it's very important to understand what colonialism was, what slavery was. It's very important to know all of the ideas and the culture and the rituals that were enacted to get black people to hate black people. In fact, I'm actually writing a book chapter on that. To get black people to viscerally hate black people and want to see them dead. And that is why, for example, there are several examples of it. To punish this black person, another person in his own group was called to the fore to defecate in his mouth. That's cultivating division. Or some of the most brutal torture, say in Suriname. Other black people were ordered to do it to other black people. Castrations, all of these things. Because they need to get used to killing themselves, to see that as an achievement. Because division is the basis of continued dominance by those who call themselves masters. Thank you.
Yes, thanks for that, Clinton. Thanks for that. Let's clap him again, man. Clap him again. Yes, yes, yes. Very passionate and some very strong points made. So now it gives me great pleasure moving right along to introduce another very distinguished professor in our midst. And I'm speaking about none other than Professor Rupert Lewis, who is Professor Emeritus of Political Thought in the Department of Government here at the University of the West Indies. He was active in the Black Power movement. It's very important. He's lived it, all right? In the 1960s, he was the editor of the Abeng. For anyone who doesn't know that publication, go and seek it out. A founding member of the Workers' Party of Jamaica. Among his books published in the University Press, UWI Press Caribbean Biography Series are Marcus Garvey in 2018. So that was published by UWI Press. Walter Rodney in 2024. He is also the author of Walter Rodney's Intellectual and Political Thought and has edited books on George Padmore, the Trinidadian-born Pan-Africanist, and Richard Hart, the Jamaican Marxist. He is a member of Jamaica's National Council on Reparation. He played an important role in the restoration and development of Liberty Hall that he did. Liberty Hall, by the way, is downtown Kingston. I hope everybody's aware of Liberty Hall, the museum that celebrates the legacy of Marcus Garvey. Anyway, he's worked with a team led by Miss Elaine Melbourne, Mr. Vivian Crawford, and Liberty Hall's founding director, Dr. Donna McFarlane. Yes, sadly, she passed several years ago. I knew Donna quite well. But Liberty Hall, hopefully everyone's familiar with that. It's our Garvey Museum in downtown Kingston. If you've never been, now is the time. So Prof. Lewis didn't give that much in his bio, but, you know, he's voluminous stuff. But what I have to say is one of the leading Garvey biographers in terms of, we call it the big three, in terms of the Garvey biographers. Tony Martin, who sadly passed away in 2013. I knew him fairly well. Robert Hill, he's in the US. It's been kind of quiet the last few years. And our very own Prof. Lewis. So we said that's the trinity of the Garvey scholars. So, you know, people need to get their flowers while they're in this life. And I have no problems giving Prof. Lewis his flowers for keeping that legacy of Garvey strong and alive. So without further ado, Professor Lewis, please come and make your presentation. Give thanks.
Let me thank Michael for this evening, for organizing it almost single-handedly. And the panelists who have preceded me. I have a strong foundation on which to go. But while preparing, the question which agitated me all of today is, how are we to act? Or rather, how are we to think about and act in this moment that we are in? That's the question, because all of the people we have spoken about were acting in their moment. So what are we to do in our moment? I was glad to hear Professor Shepard talk about Carlotta. The Cubans are the only people in the Caribbean who have taken their heroes seriously. We put up monuments and so on. And my presentation, which I have cut in the interest of time and to get to the difficult question of how we are to act, how we are to think, how we are to act, is Operation Carlotta. I don't know how many of you know of Operation Carlotta. Can I see a show of hands? Operation Carlotta arose from a request by the MPLA in Angola as they were heading for independence, that the South African Defense Force and UNITA were heading to take power in Angola. They called Fidel Castro, and the response was this creation of Operation Carlotta. Operation Carlotta involved the sending of Cuban troops to Angola. The Cubans did not have any flight charts across the Atlantic. They were flying literally blind. Refueling in Jamaica, Kingston, refueling for some time in Barbados, because Barbados is the island closest to the African continent. The violence of the 1970s was strictly about Kissinger's decision that Jamaica should not recognize Angola. It took the Americans some time to find out that thousands of Cuban soldiers had landed in Angola. The decision to undertake that military action led not only to the independence of Angola and sovereignty being obtained. Without it, they would not have any independence. It also led to Namibian independence, and it led to the negotiations that led to Mandela's freedom in 1990. So this was a critical moment in which the Caribbean played a central role in giving diplomatic support to Cuban independence. The MPLA came here, met, there were rallies and so on, and give strong Jamaican support for this. And the Jamaican musicians were also very strong in their creativity, supporting African liberation. When I went to South Africa after majority rule, people were asking if I knew Third World, if I knew this, if I knew that. There was a whole archive of music from the 1960s and 1970s, which we utilize and which were critical for the people who were fighting at that time. The other asset that Jamaica had at that time was its diplomatic skills. And not only Jamaica, but Sonny Ramphal, Mr. Ramphal from Guyana, who for some time was Commonwealth Secretary General, was able to provide strong diplomatic support, lobbying within the Commonwealth, putting pressure on Margaret Thatcher, and so on. So what the Caribbean provided was a cultural arsenal and diplomatic support. What Cuba provided was not only, well, of course, the military, but thousands of children from Southern Africa from West Africa were educated in Cuba, were given good health treatment, and so on. The Cuban military in Angola was accompanied by thousands of teachers, health personnel, and so on. The international scene in those years was dominated, of course, by a bipolar world. Cuba could not have undertaken its mission without the support of the Soviet Union. All the hardware, Cuba didn't produce any of the hardware, the planes and the weaponry and so on. So the bipolar situation at that moment facilitated Black people gaining liberation and independence. Now I switch to the current period. The current period is marked by literally a sharp change from the globalized neoliberalism, which has dominated global politics from the 1980s right down to Trump. It's a reordering of the world on a unipolar basis. And Caribbean sovereignties are now on the table. Trinidad, as we all know, was more than willing under the new Prime Minister, Kamla Besessa, to say, we give you the full support for what you are doing in Venezuela, preceded by the killing of over 100 people on boats outside of Venezuela. We are in a very dangerous situation. But that dangerous situation comes at a time when the level of political education of our people is worse than it has ever been before. Because in the neoliberal era of the last 40 to 50 years, the Asodising set is the mentality of many people. In the 60s and 70s, people were not saying that phrase did not exist. Now it is part of the vocabulary, is a vocabulary that we see that reflects people who are unable to think about the situation in which we find ourselves. If you can't think about that situation, then you can't begin to act in an appropriate way. And the governments that we have in the Caribbean, during the first Trump term, they all trooped to Mar-a-Lago to wait for Trump to come out of his bedroom to meet them, including the Jamaican Prime Minister. Disgraceful. Right? If we can talk about history until we drop down, and there are a lot of good history to talk about, but if we can't open our mouths to defend our right to independence, our right to choose who we will trade with, our right to determine how we want to live, who will govern us, what choices we need to make, then all this history is not going to be worth anything. So I am heartened by the son of a colleague and friend of mine, Prof. Mamdani. I'm heartened by Zoran Mamdani's approach to politics, his grassroots mobilization, and his intelligence, because intelligence is very important. We are at a moment when the ball is not, we don't control the handle to this thing. We do not. We are going to have to rely on the American population and its intelligence. There is no other power that can confront the forces that we face. Our governments will necessarily have to take careful diplomatic moves, careful statements, there's no doubt about that. But citizens, we as citizens are not the diplomats. We as citizens have to tell our governments that we have to craft the responses on some regional platform. Jamaica can't go it alone. Cuba can't go it alone, regardless of their heroic actions in the past. This has to be collaboration and a slow process. But to conclude, Black history faces its most trying and difficult moment as we speak. It's not a moment for rhetoric, but it's a moment for trying to understand and trying to develop allies within the regional and international community in order to face the problems we are now encountering at the early stage of the second Trump administration. You're faced with a situation where the normal rules of American politics are not going to obtain. They're presently seeking to modify the electoral system, federalize it, as they say, and take the process out of the hands of the states, the individual states. The racism, the white supremacy is deeply entrenched and has affected a lot of the American population. Our colleague, Professor Cornel West, made the point that white America is now experiencing a kind of Negroization that blacks have experienced. And what we saw in Minnesota demonstrates that, where people were treated just like how George Floyd was treated, but with plenty gunshots this time, not simply a foot in the neck. So we're going to draw on all the historical experience, but this is our time now. What are we saying about now, and what are we doing? And that is the question that I want to leave with you.
Thanks, Prof. Lewis. Yes, very important. We have to reflect on the times we live in now. And it ain't no joke. Ain't no joke right now. Things are getting perilous. All right, so I'm going to introduce very quickly our last speaker, but not necessarily the least. She was born on Jamaican soil, but is now settled in South Africa. So she's repatriated. And I'm talking about none other than Dr. Ashantewaa Nabantu Archer Ngidi. And she's the daughter, as I said, of Jamaican soil. She's a visionary and the founder of the Institute of Africology, which is based in South Africa. She is a UNIA Lady President, Pan-African Women's Organization, part of the Pan-African Women's Organization, PAWO, and a coordinator of the Empress Zion Advisory members. Is that right? Unapologetical Pan-Africanist. Without further ado, let's welcome Dr. Ashantewaa and Butu Archer and Ngidi.
Harambe! That's where you repeat, Harambe! 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 Pulling together, working together in unity. That's why we're here. Giving all honor and praises for those who have spoken before me. Giving all honor and praise for those who are here amongst us. Giving all honor and praise for those who will come from us on this historic day. I have to give a special mention to my president, the Honorable President Golding of the UNIA, who in his wise mind felt that before I left Jamaica tomorrow, I needed to be on the forum. So please, can I give a round of applause for my Honorable President? And it's important to mention that as one of the known Pan-Africanist women leader in the world, we don't get a lot of platforms. And it's only when Stephen Golding forces the issue of lady presidents back on the thing, we are now about 3 or 4 of us. And that has been a fight. And so I really want to make the world know that the UNIA has restored lady presidency, and I'm the proud holder of that title. And I believe it's one of the most relevant titles that links me to Jamaica land we love. So we give thanks for that. Brothers and sisters, my elders, the scholars in this room, community builders, I greet you with the deepest humility and profound gratitude. And thank you for allowing me this position and this time in a city that has given the world so much, but also a city that has given the world memory, resistance, rhythm, and prophecy. We gather at a powerful intersection of time, as Professor Lewis, when he closed, just explained to us that it is not a normal time. It is a time during Black History Month where a sacred pause in the calendar that we remember our history, our story, not the story beginning with change, but our future does not also end with survival. We gather just days after celebrating the Earth Day of Robert Nesta Marley, and through his songs, we were able to translate African philosophy into sound. And we gather in the aftermath of Hurricane Melissa at a point when the land is healing, homes are being rebuilt, and spirits are being tested. So today I do not come to speak to you only of Africology as an academic idea. I come to speak to you of Africology as a way of seeing, a way of remembering, and a way of rebuilding in Africa and in Africa extended. My teacher and my sage, Dr. Nabuderi, once told us in 2006, as I looked at our official Africology, the University of South Africa, he reminded us that African scholars must pursue knowledge production that can renovate African culture, defend the African people's dignity and civilizational achievements, and contribute afresh to a new global agenda that can push us out of the crisis of modernity as promoted by European Enlightenment. And this knowledge, Dr. Nabuderi reminds us, is important and relevant to the current needs of the masses, which they can use to bring about a social transformation of our present plight. Dr. Nabuderi reminds us of the Marcus Garvey University of Uganda. Eurocentric knowledge is not produced just for its own sake. Its purpose throughout the ages until today has been to enable them to know the natives in order to take control of our territories, including human and material resources, for their benefit. And such control of knowledge was used to exploit the non-European people, colonize them both mentally and geostrategically, Africa and her diaspora, as well as subordinate the rest of the world to its design. Africology, my brothers and sisters, can be used as an occasion for beginning the journey of African psychological, social, cultural, as well as political liberation. As the only standing scholar of Africology, with a PhD for philosophy and a PhD for sociology. Africology, in my estimation, must be used as a mobilization statement and the basis for articulating an African agenda for knowledge production that is not just relevant to African conditions, but also sets an agenda for the reclaiming of African originality of knowledge and wisdom, which set the rest of human society on the road of civilization. The elders asked me in 2008 to create the legacies. And these great teachers asked of those of us who were ready to do the work that the philosophical approach and the epistemology of Africology is that we give presence and priority to Africology and African heritage. We bring back the idea of the central role of language, because we know that in language are different codes, and we still are not getting it that we have to teach Kiswahili. We have to teach isiZulu. We have to teach Kukongo. We have to teach some of these languages of the Bantu people. We must use Africology as a universal matter. But where I'm going to cross over is the last requirement that they ask of us: create an Africology Institute in South Africa. So in the year 2020, I left all academic work, and at the same time was asked by President Stephen to take on the role of reviving the UNIA in Southern Africa. And now we are reviving it in universities across Southern Africa. But the king of the Zulu gave me a piece of land which was 10 acres, an old school that was closed for 9 years. Mother Moses is here, our chair and president of the Empress of Zion. She can tell you. Today we have the only Pan-African indigenous center, void of any university, void of any organization that is established by government, except for the office of the UNIA in South Africa right now. And so the key work and the mission of Africology, the Pan-African Center, is really to encourage the studies, lectures, research, and fact-finding, to ensure that African-centered research results in practical solutions to challenges facing African communities, to educate and empower disadvantaged communities with a special focus on children and youth, and to make African-specific information and resources available. So at the Institute of Africology, we have a room called the Ubuntu Room. That room belongs to the community, right, Mother Moses? We have the One Africa Gallery, where children are not taught Africa in a book, they are taught it in landscape. We have the Sankore Children's Room, which now I have more material because Daddy Marcus will be taught when I get back on Saturday. It will be the book that the children of South Africa will be translating, that book in Kiswahili and in isiZulu so that it can be cross-used. Thank you. Then we have the Biko Sankara Room. The Biko Sankara Room is the room for media, and it's where the older people meet. We have the Kemet Skills Development Center, where people are using and learning a skill, and one of it is our cannabis program, where we are teaching young people to understand the importance of cannabis as economy. And lastly, we have the Empress Menin Nutrition Room. And in that nutrition room, we eat everything that comes out of the gardens of Africology. So when we are asking about, what is it that we have to do differently? Institution building. The Honorable Marcus Garvey left us with the plan of Liberty Hall. Africology is based on the plan of Liberty Hall. The Honorable Marcus Garvey reminded us that we have opinions and philosophies. We don't have to learn any new one because they have stood the test of time. And so today, as I stand to congratulate you, my brother Michael, for this first, coming in of the Black Our Story Month, we are reminded, and in closing, that Africology challenges us to move from history as suffering to history as strategy and tactics, and that memory must be moved to as mourning Memory as mourning to memory as mobilization for a better future. One of the key aspects of Africology is rehabilitation and trauma healing. And in our faculty, Prof, I know we haven't caught up, but I tried to send you stuff. We are now going to be recruiting people who want to be accredited as Africology IKS facilitators, because lots of us are going with our knowledge. We need actual faculties where we can pass on the information so others can build the institution. Africology asks, how do we trade with each other? How do we educate our children at present? How do we govern our communities? How do we heal after storms, natural and economic? And these are not abstract questions I'm asking today. These are urgent questions of our time. This is a Long before insurance markets, African people practiced mutual aid, communal labor, shared risk, and collective responsibility. We have seen community before bureaucracy. We have seen neighbors becoming first responders. We have shared food, shared labor, shared grief, and shared hope. This is Africology in action because African societies have always understood that survival must be collective in order to become sustainable. Resilience must be social to be effective. Recovery must be communal if it is to conquer the triple hills of unemployment, poverty. I didn't touch anything.
That's why I always work with an engineer in the building. Give thanks.
Yes, I. So a moment of decision is what we are faced to in this 2026, 100 years of our Black Story Month. We are living in a time of real global uncertainty, not imagined but lived, with old systems shaking and being dismantled before new ones are fully formed. This is a fertile ground for Africans at home and Africa extended to yet again become agents of the next chapter by choosing consciousness over convenience, collaboration over competition, choosing memory over amnesia. Conclusion from the great city of Kingston, we say, Africa is not distant. Africa is not past. Africa is present in our blood, in our breath, our resilience. As the famous Bob Marley says, it is this bright future. In this bright future, you can't forget your past. And so let us remember wisely. Let us rebuild boldly. Let us walk forward together, Africa and her Africa extended family, not as fragments, but as a people restored to ourselves. It was the one beautiful Prime Minister, President Mia Mottley, who said, if Jamaica thinks they can go it alone, if Barbados thinks they can go it alone, we have the numbers, but in your little islands, Gavi said, we will not give up islands for the continent. Because Garvey recognized the importance of numbers. And when I said to Mutabaruka, I have chosen to give up this island because that plantation here must be able to be, we must be prepared to welcome you when there's what Mia Motley said in Durban, the climate change refugee. We are about to become that. And so some of us have taken a decision to let go of family sentiments and things to prepare a place on the continent so that when this climate change that has been forced upon us, all these diggings of the oil, all these fibers for your Wi-Fi, which is running right across the island underground, why are we having so much earthquakes in Jamaica? Why are we having so much tremors? Why are we having those? Because Africa awaits her creators. And so if you are stubborn and don't want to leave the plantation, the climate will do it for you. But we'll be waiting for you in Africa to welcome her co-creators. Siabonga, Giabonga.
All right. All right. We give thanks. We give thanks. Moving the program along. I'm glad to see History Man here. History? Yeah, man. Come to the podium and give me the jump drive. No stalling. And right about now, so we're going to take that cultural tribute. He has a big tune, African Inventors, and I really, really admire that tune. This is someone who doesn't really get the recognition and I think the respect in the industry, music industry, deserves. His music is conscious. It's not hype and hyperbola and gimmicks and stuff like that, you know, which seems to get the attention. So I want you, when him get the chance, do this one piece, and then we have the question and answer session after. So, Mr. Palmer, how are we looking in terms of the, you know, the logistics with the sound, with the system? All right, it's good. You give him the jump drive?
We just like it a cappella, man.
A cappella, all right.
He send it out more in the universe. We don't want nothing distract this. Yes, greetings and blessings. You know, this is an informative history man, world chronologist, archaeologist, anthropologist. Yeah, as Dr. Barnett have just said, history man don't get no respect in a JA. But when we fly go to Europe, it did there. And it's sad, reality. Remember, I won the thesis competition, 2000. Kevin Dance, the gospel artist, came second. All right? So we are sending one to the ancestor. So give me a one tune, please. African inventors and their invention. To know about them, we need information. African inventors and their invention. Wanna listen to the informative history, man. Africans make paper, chess and alphabet. Father of medicine, the great Imhotep. Africans, we are the head of civilization. Aeroplane propeller invent by James Adam. Black people, know yourself and try stand up firm. Biscuit cutter made by AP as burn. Make me say the Anzemuna support dead. LCBL invent the folding bed. African inventors and their invention. To know about them, we need information. African inventors and their invention. When I listen to the informative history, man. Watch it, big tree, and mind you get a small axe. E.G. Beckett invent the letterbox. Fit your waffy, physical fit. L.F. Brown invent the ash brine bit. Enough for them a wrinkle, a bend and all a screw. Oscar E. Brown invent the ash shoe. Babylon create the sickness, but we have the cure. John A. But invent the lawnmower. African inventors and their invention. To know about them, we need information. African inventors and their invention. Listen to the informative. Listen, history man and hear the one year. But John Marshman invent the typewriter. Them say after storm, it must be a calm. R.J. Butler invent train alarm. Who you think invent the peanut butter? He's a little black man named J.W. Carver. Enough for them matter like them take it for joke. And him see him one invent lotion and soap. African inventors and their invention. To know about them, we need information. African inventors and their invention. When I listen to the, listen again. You need to study more about your ancestor. Alexander might invent the elevator. Black was first with defend truths and right. Garrett Morgan invent the stoplight. Ancient Abyssinia, that is my home. Henry Sampson idea invent cellular phone. House abundant people run come here. Tom J. Marshall invent the extinguisher. J. Standard invent refrigerator. Paul E. Williams invent the helicopter. Black people enough things and I still don't know. Joseph Dixon invent piano. As some me get famous and me a band superstar. Robert Jonah Flemings invent the guitar. Me champer the jagana, me champer the beer. J.B. Winter invent the wheelchair. Granville Woods invent roller coaster, telephone transmitter, fire escape ladder, incubators of the earth that are Ethiopia. Life farm begin from in Mama Africa. Reggae and dancehall Jamaicans invent that. DJ Cool, I him invent hip hop. I him CM1 at the founder for rap. So how come some people still round there chat? Frederick M. Jones on no peace member this. I him invent the automatic gear shift. We invent most of the things pan the scene. Augustus Jackson invent the ice cream. Dewey Sandys say we are kings and queen. I am invent the urinalysis machine. Elijah Maca invent lubricator. John L. Love invent pencil sharpener. Maurice W. Lee invent the pressure cooker. A.L. Lewis invent window cleaner. Take plane without shoes from out of Jamaica. That was invented by Mota Baruka. African inventors and their invention. To know about them, we need information. African inventors and their invention. Listen to the informative history, man. Eli Selassie.
Yeah, you see what I mean? History, man. Talent, talent, talent. But through the politics of the music industry, you know, them kind of conscious tune don't even get on the airwaves. And yeah, whole heap of gatekeeper, man. The whole thing twisted and corrupted, you know. All right, there we go. Well, yes, Breadlock. So we have, you know, we want unbiased music station and all them. Boy, 'cause me know, you know. 'Cause me knock on certain doors and me see for myself how corrupt the whole thing is. Them don't want the quality, them just want the money to come in under the table. But that's another subject. So right now, we are gonna take a short question and answer period. And it has to be short because unfortunately we do have a curfew here at UWI. I can tell you the curfew is 9 o'clock. So yes, the place shut down. That's one of the things, the limitation of institution. But we have time for question and answer. Also, there is food and refreshments here on my right. Vegetarian yatties. We call them yatti out here. Delicious, I must say, courtesy of Benji. Unfortunately, though, ideally they would be free. You know, I would just pay the money and just buy. 'Cause obviously, but you know, basically that wasn't in the budget. In fact, I had almost zero budget to put on this. But ideally, everyone should get, you know, complimentary food. But can't work. You have to pay them. Just to let you know. All right. First question. Yes, my brother. Microphone. Let me give you this mic. I hope you don't have a book you're gonna read or anything.
No,
you know?
I don't have a book, but good day, everybody. My name is Torina Beckford, and I'm a Pan-Africanist and a Garveyite. I have drafted a document that entails the Caribbean, Africa, and Papua New Guinea united into a single nation state, which is the vision of Marcus Mosiah Garvey. I have 3 copies of these documents that I'd love for you guys to look at. It's just a draft document, but it's a start to recognizing the dream of Marcus Mosiah Garvey in uniting the African, Caribbean, and Papua New Guinean people of the black race. So we want to create a federation uniting all the oppressed peoples of the black race, and I've drafted a draft document that you guys can look on. I have 3 copies, and I'd love for you guys to see them. Sorry about this bottle in my hand. My sincerest apologies, and I'd love for Miss Verene Shepherd, Honorable Miss Verene Shepherd, and you guys, and for the public to circulate these 2 documents. For the public, you guys can look at these. Please actually instill this part here. Sorry about that. But it is just a draft document where it is required for the heads of state of the Caribbean, Africa, and Papua New Guinea to sign a single document committing to the cause of the United States of Africa. It is a big step forward to solidify our vision of uniting against racism, discrimination, poverty, African exploitation, and all the other things that affect the black race. And so I'd love for this to be a platform where we can move forward to make a strategic development into the unity of the black race, a geopolitical achievement where we can cooperate within the Caribbean, within Africa and Papua New Guinea. We can have free travel. We can actually strengthen our economy, have a stronger currency, modernize our country. We can have industries where we can have factories to process the vast raw materials of Africa so we can benefit. Rather than selling it to the Chinese or the Europeans, we can process this. We need to develop these infrastructures and institutions in Africa. My apologies for that statement.
All right. So your contact number is on this document or anything, or you have any cards? Well, get some people distribute your number. Who else has a question, perspective? All right. So 2 hands went up. I'm gonna take you, and then I'll take you, Carla.
Ninth. So when it comes to the nursery rhyme book, right? So when it comes to the nursery rhyme book, yeah. How you might have stated it before, but how again that you was going to make it more institutionalized, meaning that more in the curriculum are more present in different basic schools or primary schools. And there's a next question as well, but yeah. I'll state the next question as well.
Yeah, go ahead.
And for the
So you had mentioned, Miss, that the UNIA, you guys are working towards bringing more awareness across universities. And along the lines of what my colleague just asked, we're querying about what is being done to institutionalize more information across universities and nurseries. That was the second question. So
Okay, let me answer the first and the second. You can jump in if you want. For the first one, there's a process. So we sent the book to the Ministry of Education because they got to approve it before any of their agencies like the Early Childhood Commission will push it for you in terms of distributing and getting it out to the institutions. We got back a good review. I mean, there were some things we disagree with. There's a picture of Nanny with a sword and a gun. They were pointing out some things which I thought was, we can't whitewash the history. You know what I mean? But they did approve the book as being useful with teacher guidance or instruction. I think that was the tone or gist of their summary after that. It wasn't a book for children to just buy and read themselves, which I didn't mind because I really wrote it for teachers. It is supposed to increase the teachers' awareness of history and get them thinking that, listen, you don't have to regurgitate some 300-400-year-old nursery rhyme just because that's what you learned, and you can even create for yourself and for your students. So anyway, since the start of this year, we've gotten some corporate sponsorship we set out to get sponsorship that we could give one book to every basic school, right? They don't call them basic schools anymore. They're called ECIs, Early Childhood Institutions, right? There are about 2,500 of them on the island that are registered. There are more that are not. We got sponsorship so far for 200 books. So we're still climbing to that 2,500, and we've started distributing those 200s already. So we did Hanover last month. We're going to do St. Anne. We're going parish by parish, so to speak. We set up events, the teachers come, we explain the book, and then we give one for each institution that's represented there. So that's where we're at. We promoted this book, I gotta say though, heavily in the Caribbean at the Marcus Garvey Symposiums in October last year, and it was well received. And it's so funny because, this was written kind of with a heavy Jamaican lean to it in terms of the content. I mean, there's a few things about African characters and so forth. But they responded to it simply because they suffer from the same British curriculum as we. So the nursery rhymes that they're based on, everybody knows those old nursery rhymes. So the idea of changing the narrative, they were very open to. So we're still on track in terms of we want a complete distribution. It might take us the entire year for all the basic schools, but it's not enough to just put it in the teachers' hands. There have been a lot of books that have come out, and I've seen personally they end up at the bottom of some drawer. You know, we talk about Garveyism. Remember in 2012, it was under Minister Thwaites. There was a compendium done. Amina Blackwood Meeks did it. I personally know I went to schools and found that book in the bottom of the guidance counselor's drawer. You know about that. This is a teacher in schools, so he knows too, right? So it needs effort, you know. So we're still waiting. We've approached Chase and stuff. It's one thing to print the books and get them out there, but what I'm really focusing on is the gathering to expose the teachers to it. Because I find that if I can present this book, it goes a lot further than just putting it in an envelope and sending it to you. You know what I mean? So you understand the gist behind it. To your second question, what we need is more UNIA chapters. And what we don't have at U is a functional UNIA chapter since COVID. Since COVID, we haven't gotten the UE chapter back up. But hopefully, maybe we'll find a strong faculty advisor in the person of Dr. Barnett or somebody else. But that's not the important part. The important part is the students who want to get active, the students who want to do the work. And I find that is one of the most challenging things with this generation. No disrespect to you all, but I find you do not mobilize the way generations before you did. You know, did anybody see the article today about this? This is real science article about this generation being the first generation to have a lower IQ than the generation before them. And it comes from the fact of, you know, using the AI instead. Your study habits are different than ours. So you're not absorbing information the way we used to. You know, we spend hours and we are memorizing and we're doing that. You guys just plug it into the AI, you get the instant answer. The problem with instant answers is they don't stick in your brain, as if when you take 3, 4, 5 hours to get to the answer, you know? So it's an issue. It's an issue. So if you guys are interested, if you're students here, come talk to me after. I'm definitely looking for at least 7 students to jumpstart the UE chapter. Again, we have chapters at all the teachers' colleges, at UTech. I've spent a lot of years focusing on that because I really believe this is the way to provide some stability and longevity to the UNIA in the 21st century.
I just wanted to add, if I can. So in regards of South Africa, UNI has been in South Africa for almost 100 years, right? So when Pixley Kaseme and why am I forgetting his name now? The writer of Soul Plache, when they went to the Pan-African, he went to the Pan-African Congress of Manchester and a few others, and he had the chance to come back to the Orange Free State at the time and create the first UNIA chapter. And so in Kimberley in South Africa, we have the historical records of those meetings of the UNIA. So this year, in November, I wrote a letter to all the universities because I'm now the chair of the IKS Institute. I'm the one who accredits indigenous knowledge institutions. And in South Africa, indigenous knowledge is not just institutions, buildings. It's people with knowledge that are indigenous. So that's another thing that we've worked hard on in the last 3 years. So the UNIA letter has gone out to every single university, the 10 major universities and 1,000 colleges across South Africa, informing them that we are intending to create the UNI student and university chapters. But at the Institute of Africology, we have our UNIA meetings for that particular high school that has started in the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal. So we are going a little bit lower on that spectrum. We're going for the high schools for the UNIA, and they get Marcus Garvey. They understand the importance. We have linked Marcus Garvey, Biko, Sankara, and Traore. And those are the key ones for now, until we put the women's list out there. But that's what's happening, and we're getting traction. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So,
Mike, just to add to something she said,
yeah.
because I don't think Jamaicans understand the student clubs and the student politics in South Africa is way ahead of ours.
Really?
Yeah, because of the history of apartheid, the way the government invests in the student. It's not like I want like a G2K or PNP on the campus here, you know. I mean, these are established groups, they get funding, and they move them up through the ranks. You know what I mean? Like political parties are heavily invested in the university campuses in South Africa because of that's where the fight from apartheid, you know, that was their battleground, and it has always remained a sacred place for them. So the thing she's saying about writing to the universities and pushing the UNIA, I mean, it sounds great, but it's much greater than it sounds if you understand what this means for us in South Africa.
Okay. Thanks. I was just, yes, Carl, your question.
Yeah,
Will be the
good night,
last
everybody.
one.
Thank you. My name is Carl Kaiser. I have two questions, and I thank Mr. Prof. Lewis for his question. What we can do practical right now in this time, and I have a question on a global level. So what the UE institutions and also the other organizations doing regarding feeding black AI? So isn't it like we should, you know, I learned something about J.A. Rogers tonight and Miss Ann James. So what I'm going to do is going home, check Dr. Google, and yeah, maybe I'm lazy and just check AI. So that AI is done by, I mean, I watch color, but I think white people. So what happened to the black AI, which is the source for, I assume, many, many, many young people now and in the future? So I would like to know about that. And the second question I have on a local level. We talking about changing education system. And I'm coming to Jamaica for quite a long time now. And these discussions we're having for a long time. So to change it, I think, or let's put it different. We're living in a time where we talk about changing of the constitution. So all changes come through political changes. So what I miss in the discussion about the constitution, and I encourage every Jamaican, because a mosquito in a room make a difference, to think about the electoral system which exists in Jamaica, which is a Westminster electoral system, and shouldn't that be included in the current discussion much more? What kind of electoral system you choose for Jamaica in the future? Thanks.
All right, thanks for that. Your first suggestion, Carl, very intriguing, because obviously I'm an educator at UE, and I can tell you firsthand when I realized this AI thing was taking on a life of its own because of the kind of papers, essays I was getting in my African diaspora class. All of a sudden, the answers that I was given, so I asked him to talk about Garvey and his achievements. And this is to show you how uncritical these students are. Because I always, at the beginning of the semester, go on the podium and talk about how fantastic Garvey is and how he truly deserves to be our first national hero. And I mean that not just because he was the first, he was the first person who got that acclaim, but that to me he's top of the podium out of all seven. So I'm biased. I said he's our first and he has #1 ranking. But having said so, I give him all of that speech. Then when they turn in their essay on Garvey, in it I said, well, he was a buffoon, he never had any business sense, and all of this stuff. So this is what they hand in to me, and then so I just fail that and give it back to them. And they said, sir, well, why you fail me and all of that? And I said, well, #1, the source is questionable. right? You write and you reproduce all of this stuff. Is this coming from you? Is that your honest opinion of Marcus Garvey, a terrible businessman, a total buffoon who didn't know what the hell he was doing? I said, you write all this. What you really expected after I spoke, for 3 lectures on how great he was, you expect me to pass that? I said, use a little common sense, man, So I don't know. I'm like, say, whoa, this new group of students. What are you thinking? You're not even. So they just replicate the information and just put it there and think they're going to get an A. So I said, well, not in this class, But I always give a talk about what I'm looking for, critical thinking, and I have a 0 tolerance policy with AI. So I tell them that. So I said, if you want to use AI and go to town with it, this is not the class for you. You need to go to someone else's class. Because if I see over 20% AI, and I say this very much, you're going to be penalized. Maybe you be allowed at 20. Oh, you got 60% AI. And I failed. Why did I fail? Well, 60% AI is kind of high. I said, how much of this is in your essay? How much of you have you put in that essay? Oh, I only used it just to sort out my references. I said, so you need AI to organize your references at this level? And I put it out there. I said, if you cannot write your own essay yourself, so now I'm dealing, because some students come up to me and say, well, you know what? I can't do an essay myself. I need AI to generate the essay, get the references. I can't do it. I said, if you don't have the ability to write the essay and do your referencing without AI, then this is not the class for you. I ain't gonna let you use that walking stick, that crutch. So I'm very heavy on that because I want them to have genuine skills and capacity. So no wonder the level is dropping, it's going down, as has been mentioned. And if they have any self-respect, I mean, how do you feel that you have a lower IQ than people before you? I ask basic questions about Jamaican culture. When was reggae created? Give me the decade. Oh, does that sound like a 20th century question? Yes, it is. But Mr. Gen Z, sir, and you expect me to know that? Why? And I mean, I'm telling you, this is the the new generation I'm dealing with. I said, just give me the decade. Yes, it's in the 20th century, but not that far, far, far down in the 20th century. Why, they didn't have a clue. So I said, all right, dancehall then. When did dancehall start? Ah, boy. Well, yes, it did start in the 20th century. That's the problem. So my thing, there's a disconnect because in your mind, anything's 20th century is not relevant to your life. So we have some issues here, pedagogical. Embedded in the younger generation and they don't shake out of it. It's not a bright look for the future of this country if these are the minds, and this is university level. So I don't know what's going on at a high school. I'm frightened. So anyway, I don't want to, go down that path because that's something.
Just to,
yes.
to respond
Real,
to,
because we've got to wrap up. We've gone past
I wanted to respond to your question because you asked about what about the black AI, right? We are involved with a project right now. This might take a little while, but we've begun. In fact, we're actually working with people out of Rwanda for this to create a virtual Pan-African space, right? But listen, the AI is just a tool. It's just my experience with AI, I've been using it to shrink speeches. The first time was when I was at the UN. And they give you 2 minutes and they cut off your mic. And I had a lot to say. I worked on my speech the whole night. And I could only get my speech down to 4 minutes. Like I felt like there's nothing I can't take nothing out of this because. So I put it in the AI to say, give it back to me. Give me back something that's 2 minutes. And what it gave me back, I still had to add into it. And when I added into it, it crunched it at 3 minutes. And I said, all right, I'm just going to read the thing fast, right? Because AI can take into account how fast, when you know you got to read fast, right? But let me say this. The AI can only draw on the information that human beings have put into it. So there's a lot of times I am doing stuff, even research on Marcus Garvey, and I will ask the AI a question and it will give me back an answer. And I know the answer is wrong. I know the answer is wrong. And then I look through where it's drawing these answers from. So it's a process. I guess what you're trying to say is a lot of this information we're talking about, we need to make sure it needs to go in there so that the AI can draw on it.
Create a receptacle.
Yes.
Correct.
And I found that it does that because this Global Garvey Symposium series, we have put stuff into the internet that I see the AI is now drawing back from and giving answers like particular dates and places that Garvey spoke at that it didn't know before.
Yes.
I put that into the internet.
Right. Absolutely. Yes, Prof.
Yeah, well, one of our students said, when AI came out 2 years ago, we put the entire.
Oh, the virtual.
Yeah, when AI came out about 2 years ago, we put in about 2 volumes of Garvey material, because what it had was really terrible. But I wanted to mention that the people in our Department of Computing have a responsibility to continue the work that Dr. Ashley Taylor Hamilton Taylor has done, right? And he's at the same stage as you are at. He has a whole bank of information on Ethiopia. His mother, Norma Hamilton, was in a lot of Pan-African work. I mean, Ashley is the only Pan-Africanist I know in computing. My son-in-law is head of computing. He's from Cameroon. But being from Africa doesn't necessarily mean that you have a full Pan-African undertaking. Being African is being African, but you have to have the orientation to want to do that. So we need to have more technical people who are involved in Pan-Africanism. But on the Constitution point, I think that process is going to be resumed in Jamaica inevitably out of the discussion of sovereignty. Sovereignty is going to, the challenge that we are facing, which will lead us to think more carefully about the institutional structures that we have. And I take my sister's point, my daughter's point, because that relationship is going to be strategic for us.
Thank you. So, this is the last question, Queen Mother Moses, and please make it succinct, Queen Mother, and we're going to wrap it up after that. Give thanks.
I'd like to thank you for this program and to acknowledge all of our presenters. And we deal with solution because we're solutionists. So we have founded the Global Run Pack, the Rastafari Unity Nation Pan-African Collective for unity in the community with economic prosperity for Africans at home and abroad. We've been doing this since November. And every month, another African country comes on board. We have extensive, because we're working with the RCC, the Rastafari Continental Council. And we have used and chosen Sierra Leone Rastafari Council as the model that we're going to replicate for the other African countries. And of course, we have RMO, the Rastafari Mansions and Organization. The Pan-African organizations we are working with is the Ethiopian World Federation and of course, UNIAACL. And the only political party we are working with is Jamaica's first political party, Marcus Messiah Garvey's People Political Party, headed by, of course, a 23-year-old youth leader, because we're pushing youth leadership. The next global run pack will be skills transfer, and we will be addressing the black AI, because for I and AI is African intelligence. AI is ancient intelligence. It is the context in which one looks at it. And we have to always be sure, no matter what, we check our sources. So AI cannot give us anything that we're not going to double check. Give thanks for all these words. Blessed love.
Well, that's it. We give thanks for your participation and everything like that. We have another installment lecture, Black History on Thursday, right here, same time, 6 to 9. For those who can make it, and that's going to feature I. Jabalani Tafari, it's going to feature Dr. Imani Tafari, and a whole lot more. Okay, so we continue Thursday for those who can make it. Thanks for taking the time out, and hopefully, we've inspired you to read Black history, if not read it, but implement it. All right, so give thanks for you coming in, give thanks for the coming out and the coming in, and so forth. Thank you. Okay, I put on a little music and yeah, definitely.
Together.
Yeah.
Brother Clinton, come close. Just want a group picture with the
All right,
presenters.
thanks.
Want a group picture with the presenters.
Yeah.